Okay, this one we're going to do is we're going to look at the cross-sectional anatomy of the spinal cord. Some point we're going to zoom in here and focus on this, but I want to kind of come out first and review some things that I did in the earlier recording, but with a different model. So the spinal nerve is when the dorsal and the ventral roots come together. So here and here represent the spinal nerve. The branches of the spinal nerve, you have the very large part is the ventral ramus, which you see here, and then you have the dorsal ramus. Now these here are called rami communicantes. Those are important in the autonomic nervous system, but I'm pretty much going to ignore them for now. The difference between the dorsal ramus and the ventral ramus is where we're going to and from. Dorsal rami is bringing information to and from structures in your back, and the ventral rami is bringing information to and from structures in your anterolateral body wall and your upper and lower limbs. The right here, a little bit there, this is your dorsal root, which has axons of sensory neurons. The cell bodies of those sensory neurons are located right here in the dorsal gray horns, or not dorsal gray horns, dorsal root ganglion, dorsal root ganglion. Here in the front, we have the anterior root, which has axons of motor neurons. And if you notice, if you look at the colored wires, you see the yellow and the green wires are going back here, and these black and red wires are coming from this structure there and this structure there, which will be important very shortly, okay? So let's kind of talk about the gray matter versus white matter. Gray matter is where you see here, looks like a butterfly. I say it looks kind of like a bra or a bikini top. The gray matter is where you find cell bodies, okay? So just so you heads up, the dorsal root ganglion is gray matter because it has cell bodies. Here, it's got cell bodies. It does also have some unmyelinated axons in it, though, too. The gray matter in the spinal cord is separated into horns, and we'll kind of go a little bit more in depth very shortly, but first we're just kind of going a cursory view of it. So the dorsal gray horns are back here in the back. They contain what we refer to somatic and visceral sensory nuclei. So the term nucleus, or nuclei is plural for nucleus, is a group of cell bodies in the central nervous system, because we now are in the central nervous system because we're in the spinal cord. So dorsal gray horns are where we find somatic and visceral sensory nuclei. The lateral gray horns are only located in your thoracic spinal cord and your first two lumbar spinal cord segments. So right here and here are lateral gray horns. Okay, so I'm just going to do it right there. So those are lateral gray horns. They're the location of visceral motor nuclei. So they're where we have cell bodies of visceral motor neurons that will be innervating things like your heart, sweat glands. So it's going to be things that are going to be not skeletal muscles, we'll put it that way, not skeletal muscles. The anterior gray horns, which we see up here in the front, that's where it contains somatic motor nuclei. So they have cell bodies of neurons, or I should say somatic motor neurons. So those are going to be innervating skeletal muscle. So you'll kind of notice kind of some of the different colors there. So it could be, if it's coming from the lateral gray horn, those are going to be visceral motor neurons that are involved there. And if it was anterior gray horn, it's going to be somatic motor neurons. You have the central canal. Again, central canal is lined by ependymal cells, which are neuroglial cells that help with circulation and of the CSF in the spinal cord. The gray commissures, you do have these gray commissures above and below that central canal. We can pretty much ignore those. The white matter, those are myelinated axons, and they have tracts or bundles of myelinated axons that have common origins and or destinations. So the white columns are like a two-way highway. So we begin carrying information up to the brain or down from the brain. So we have ascending tracts, which are carrying sensory information up. Descending tracts carry motor information down the spinal cord from the brain. Okay. Each of the white columns has, we're going to look, actually I'll show you each of the white columns. So we have on the top, I'm going to show you here, this is the dorsal white column that's in the back. Well, you'll notice is up in the top picture, it's all colored in blue, and the bottom picture is not colored at all. So the top image is showing you what we refer to as ascending tracts. So the ascending tracts are colored yellow, green, or blue. In the bottom picture, you see the descending tracts colored, various colors. So in the dorsal white column, or you can call it the posterior white column, you have to include the term white. You can't just say posterior column. So it's either dorsal white column or posterior white column. Doesn't matter. Is that has only ascending tracts, and these are the tracts that they have in there. These two tracts are carrying information in regards to things like vibrations and discriminative touch and pressure, information that ultimately were detected by, say, like the Meissner's corpuscles or Pacinian corpuscles. That's what type of information it's bringing. The difference between the two tracts is the fasciculus gracilis tract is carrying information from the lower half of your body, while the fasciculus cuneatus tract is carrying information from your upper half of your body. The lateral white columns are on the sides. Okay, so we see here. You'll notice I see colors in the picture above, and I see colors picture on the side. So it does have both ascending and descending tracts. The spinocerebellar tracts are carrying information in regards to proprioception, things you don't have to think about, don't even know aware of. The lateral spinal thalamic tract carries information in regards to pain and temperature. The rubrospinal tract and the lateral cortical spinal tracts are descending tracts. The lateral cortical spinal tract is going to be involved in voluntary control of skeletal muscles in your limbs, distal limb muscles, that'd be one of them. The rubrospinal tract is involved in control of muscles, but at a subconscious level. It's not voluntary control. So you'll maybe learn about that in the lecture at some point. If you have me for lecture, yes, you will. The anterior white columns are in the front. See here and here. It again does have both sensory, or I should say ascending tracts and descending tracts. So those are in the anterior white column. And then over here I didn't label lateral white column. The anterior white column has something called the anterior spinal thalamic tract that carries information in regards to crude touch and pressure. They refer to as non-discriminative touch and pressure. The anterior white column also has these various tracts. The anterior cortical spinal tract controls skeletal muscles at a conscious level, but they're more your proximal limb muscles and axial muscles, like muscles in your trunk. The vestibulospinal, reticulospinal, and tectospinal tracts, they control skeletal muscles at a subconscious level. Again, you may or not learn more about those in lecture. We would not really talk about them in lab, but just that you know that these type of things are found in that spinal cord. So you should be able to minimally, if you have me for lab, tell me what what is found in those white columns. If I ask you what's found in the lateral white columns, you say it has both ascending and descending tracts of myelinated axons. That's minimally what I want. In lecture, you'll have to go a little bit further for that because we will talk about these different pathways. But right now, just kind of you're aware of these things exist. So, but I do want to kind of go back to and kind of zoom in on this picture and kind of mention some terms because it's kind of important, kind of how you like write things in what's the word I want? State things because there's going to be it's going to be a little bit of importance. So the location of somatic motor nuclei was here. So I'm going to color it in red. Okay, so I'm going to color this, the anterior great horns. So another way of saying it, I could say it's a location of cell bodies of somatic motor neurons. That means the same exact thing. So if I ask you what we find in there, you can say it either way, you're perfectly fine. So these are going to be controlling skeletal muscles. The location of visceral motor nuclei, I'm going to do color in green. So those are the lateral gray horns. It's, again, only located in your thoracic spinal cord, the 12 thoracic spinal cord segments, and your first 2 lumbar spinal cord segments. That's the location of visceral motor nuclei, or you can also say it's a location of visceral motor neurons. Okay? Or I should say, sorry, location of cell bodies of visceral motor neurons. That's how we should say it. The other ones are a little bit trickier. Okay, so in the back, in the dorsal gray horns, this is where we find it's a location of both sensory or somatic sensory and visceral sensory nuclei. So I'm going to color just a little bit different. So I'm going to do here for gold, and I'm just going to do kind of gray here, darker gray there. So the gold and the gray are both part of those dorsal gray horns. Where I colored in gold, that's where we're going to find the somatic sensory nuclei. Where I've done the gray, that's where we find the visceral sensory nuclei. So what are we referring to when we say somatic sensory nuclei and visceral sensory nuclei? Well, these are going to be cell bodies of interneurons that are involved in processing sensory information. So if I ask you what was found in the dorsal gray horns, and again, I wouldn't even try to differentiate between the two, is what's found in the dorsal gray horns, you could say it's a location of somatic and visceral sensory nuclei, perfectly acceptable. If you said it's the location of, say, cell bodies of sensory neurons, you would be incorrect, because the cell bodies of sensory neurons are found in the dorsal root ganglion. So those are going to be, when we talk about sensory pathways, they're referred to as called first order neurons. They're the ones that are bringing the information from the periphery to the central nervous system. Once you're here, you're now in the central nervous system. Those aren't going to be referred to as sensory neurons anymore. They're interneurons or second order neurons. So they're going to take the information from the first order neuron, say, okay, I gotcha. And they're going to carry that information, and then the axons are going to be traveling up one of the white columns depending on what type of sensory information it's taking. So you would have to say it's the location of cell bodies of, you could say, sensory interneurons, and it would be fine. But don't say it's the location of cell bodies of sensory neurons, because I would not accept it. Okay, so be very careful of how you say it. So interneurons are found between neurons, so they're carrying information, sensory information, up to, in lots of cases, to something called a third order neuron, which you'll talk about at a later date. Okay, so that's where we find them. Okay, so in the back here, let's just kind of hatch it. That's the dorsal white column. So that has ascending tracts of myelinated axons only. So that's where the fasciculus cuneatus and fasciculus gracilis tracts are. I'm going to do the lateral white column I'm going to hatch it green. Obviously, you can do any color you want. I just was too lazy to change my colors on my screen. So that's the lateral light column, which has the both ascending and descending tracts of myelinated axons. And in the front, here's your anterior white column, which again also has descending and ascending tracts of myelinated axons. At this point in time, you do not, if you have me for a lecture, you do not need to tell me what tracts are located there. If you have me for lab, you never have to tell me what specific tracts. You don't say, oh, the anterior coracospinal tract is located there. No. I just want you to know you have ascending and descending tracts there, and that they're tracts or bundles of myelinated axons. All right, so we're going to leave it there.